Hey, and welcome to the color chapter. I'm very excited to help you master this skill because this is one of the hardest skills for designers, me included, to master. So let's dive in and help you master this skill. What we're going to cover in this chapter is, first of all, some of the basics that you should understand about colors before we diving into how to apply them in our designs. Then we're going to talk about the principles that you should be mindful of when applying them. We're going to talk about how to apply them. I'm going to do a demo, and then we're going to sum it up. So let's get started with some of the basics that you should know. I want to cover three terms, basic terms. Those are hue, lightness, and brightness that we're going to cover, and we're going to use them when talking about design. So I want to show you how that looks like and what does that mean. So let me jump into my design software to show you how that looks like. The best way for me to explain about these terms is actually to show you a color picker. And I'm going to show you this in Figma, but this actually looks exactly the same in every design software. So what we have here is basically all of the different colors, and this is what we call hue. So changing the hue basically means changing the underlying color. So whether this is red or green or purple. This is the actual hue. Now here, what you see is actually kind of a matrix of the saturation. So making something more saturated means there's more color in it. Making something less saturated, meaning it's becoming gray. There's less of the hue inside of the color. So this is what happens if we go from left to right. And if we go from top to bottom, that's actually the brightness. As if we're here at the top, there is, it's very, very bright. If we're going down here, it becomes very, very dark. So at the top here, no color, no saturation, and the most brightness is white. And if we're taking something with, no brightness at all, it's dark. And this is actually dark without color, and this is dark with color. Now, although you might think these blacks are actually the same, they're actually not exactly the same. And you will see that when you're looking at shadows sometimes. So shadow is never just, mostly in real life, a shadow is never just gray. It's gray with some kind of a color in it. So those are the three basic terms. And actually, I just want to jump here into Photoshop and show you in the Photoshop palette. You can see it looks just the same, right? This is the hue, and this is, what we've covered. But actually, you can see that it's actually measurable. So you have here the HSB, which stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. Note, if we change this, note the arrows going up and down, changing the hues. If we're changing the saturation, now we're adding saturation. Note this little circle is moving to the left as we're adding, or to the right when we're decreasing. And brightness, we can decrease the brightness. It will go down or up. So I hope that kind of helps you understand those basic terms for hue, saturation, and brightness, which we'll use a lot. All right, now that you understand the basic terms, I want to talk about a different concept that is called blend mode. Let's jump right back into the design software and I'll show you how that looks like. Okay, so I want to talk about blend modes, and this is basically means how the colors are blending. Everything that we stack in our design is kind of layered one on top of the other, and blending mode means how do the colors interact. So by default, if we have a color stacked on top of a photo, it's just going to cover it. And we can change that by reducing opacity of the layer, right? But that's basically just going to mean take that color and reduce how opaque it is. However, we do have other functions. In Figma, it's here in the layer palette. It's also in the layer palette of any other design software. And here you can see a lot of different ways of how these colors interact. So if I'm going to choose multiply, you see that all of a sudden it looks very different. And if I choose screen, that's also going to look very different. And so what are these different colors? First of all, I just want you to know that it exists because you can use these to create like very cool, visual effects and colors, and to create, colorize either the photos or the elements on your page and help them interact in a kind of a cool way. But just so that you understand what actually goes on here is that in these first ones, which are, let's call them the multiply, but these two are just variations of it, basically what's happened is we're adding the color on top of what's below. So basically every time we have black, we almost don't have any color to add to, but every time we have brightness, then that purple is being added to this color. On the other hand, if we're choosing screens, these are the light ones, basically meaning now the color is being added only to the dark tones. So as you can see, the blacks are turning into the purple. The bright ones are almost just, if something was completely white here, it wouldn't change at all. But so the light ones are not really affected, but the dark ones are being affected by the color. So this applies, it lightens the color. And just so that you understand, like, how does this relate to real life? So you might have heard of, RGB. That's basically how our screens work, right? We have 3 different colors, and that's actually how light works in general, right? The light, visible light from the sun is basically 3 colors, and they're being combined together. And they're being combined together. I'm going to take all of these 3 circles here, and they're being combined together in this additive mode. So screen, they're just adding to one another. So actually white light, when we see something as a white light from the sun, it's actually the combination of all of these colors, 3 colors together. So red, green, and red together equals white. If it's only just red and green, it will turn out as yellow, and then here we have magenta, and then we have cyan. So this is how the real light in the world works. And that is actually the opposite way from how printing works, right? Because when you print, you're adding, right? Here, you're adding to the page, kind of like how we're adding here. You want to add to, if you're here, we're adding them to the black. So they're becoming visible. But here, if we'll add them to one another, and let me put this in the multiply mode, then now you see that by taking these colors, these 3 that came out here, the yellow, cyan, and magenta, now we get all of these colors actually printed on a page. So that's why you'll see any printer that you might have at home, or if you ever go to Printer Design, it will have 3 types of ink. Actually, it will also have a black ink, just to be more efficient. Instead of wasting 3 inks, they've also created the 4 one. That's why it's called CMYK. K stands for the black, and this is cyan, magenta, and yellow. So that's how real color works in the world. Whether you're printing, you're going to use the CMYK model. If you're designing for the screen, you're going to be using the RGB model, just because our screens are little lights that adding color to one another. And I just want you to experiment with these different light modes, blend modes, so that you can create very cool colors and visual effects in your design. All right, now that we've got the basics down, let's cover the principles of using color. Now, the first principle that we want to make sure when we're using colors is to make sure that the colors that we're using actually help us tell the story and the message that we want in our design. So every color has their own meaning, their own association that we have, emotionally, and depending on where we live, it has some associations, and we have to be mindful of these specific associations when we are applying the colors in our design. Let me show you some examples. So let's imagine that we're designing some, meditation app, and obviously we want the story of this meditation app to be about us relaxing, right? So we might choose a color like a pale blue color that maybe gives us the association of the sky or something calming like this. But if we're going to use a color like red, that's usually gives us the association of danger, fire, passion, stress, that's going to be the completely opposite story of what we're trying to say here. So we have to be mindful of the story, and we also have to be mindful of the association that each color has. Now, those associations can also be dependent on culture. They are not the same everywhere in the world. And the example that I have here is we in the West, we usually use the color black to associate death and mourning, right? When we go to a funeral, we usually dress in black, and so black is the color where we show sad things. However, in the East, in Japan, for example, the exact same situation would be using the color white. So they always dress up in white for funeral, and for them, white is the color of sadness. So that basically means that you have to understand who is your audience, because different audiences, and that can depend on, you know, where they live, but it also can depend on who they are, might have different associations. So you have to, going back to where you start understanding who you are designing for, and as part of your research, you want to understand what association the people that you're designing for have for specific colors. Now, the meaning of the color that we choose can also have functional implications in our design. So for example, if we're checking a website, if we're designing a website and we want to create a checkout button, then we will have different associations or functional association based on the color that we choose. So with green, for example, you know, we all have the association of green and red from traffic lights. So we know that green means go, approved, and we know that red means stop or not approved. So if you'll design a proceed to checkout button with the red color, it will immediately send the functional message that you should not proceed, right? And I will most likely not click a button that's red to proceed to checkout. Now, that is not to say that we should never create red buttons, but that depends on the functional context of that button. Now, a gray button also have functional implications because we've been trained seeing designs and functional and interacting with UI over and over again to know that when a button is grayed out, we even have this term grayed out, that usually means that this button is disabled. So the picking the color gray for a specific button might send the wrong message that we can't actually click this button. So you want to make sure that the message, whether it is functional or emotional or in terms of a story, is aligned with what you're actually trying to achieve. Now, I'm not going to go through all of their colors and their meaning here because that would make this video super, super long, but we are going to include it in the resources doc along with this video. And you should definitely go through this and familiarize yourself with each one of the colors and their meanings and associations. Also, I actually do this and review this list and association every time I'm starting a new design project and I'm looking for a dominant color, just to make sure that I remember what that means. All right, the second principle that we should be mindful of is to make sure that the colors support the hierarchy that we're trying to achieve here. And we've covered this in the chapter on hierarchy, that color can help you achieve the right hierarchy. So let's just quickly revisit this. When we have a design, and I'm looking here about the Contact Us button, when we have a color that's very contrasted from the background, it will create a very strong hierarchy. We will look at this element first. If the contrast between the element and the background is lower, then we're probably not likely going to look at it, or the hierarchy is going to be decreased. And the same with this design. If we want to make sure, if we want to grab attention or draw attention to this leather jacket badge with the price, we can use a color to increase the hierarchy of this specific element. Now, the third principle, and this is the toughest one, is that the colors actually need to work together. And obviously there are colors that completely don't work together, right? When you put them one next to each other, it creates flickering, it creates annoyance, and you don't want to do this. And so the way that we're going to cover how to combine colors together, which is called palette, a combination of colors is called palette, and we're going to cover how to do that in this video. But the general rule that I want to tell you is that if you're just starting out, or if you're not feeling comfortable with color, try to use as less colors as possible, because that's going to decrease the likelihood that you're going to make a mistake of choosing colors that don't interact well together. And the last principle that I want to cover, it's not a must principle, so I'll call it a bonus principle, is, are these colors brandable? And what I mean by that is, whenever we start off a project, you know, we never start off from scratch. We always work within a context. So if I have to work today to brand or create a website for a brand in the fast food industry, right? I might choose whatever colors I want, but McDonald's is always there. And people already have McDonald's and their colors in their heads already. And my goal as a designer is always to create, uniqueness and to differentiate the project that I'm working on versus the other things that are in the customer's head. So if I'm designing a fast food brand, I will probably not likely to choose red and yellow because these colors are not brandable. Now note, these colors are actually used again and again within the fast food industry. They are actually very popular colors within the fast food industry, but they are not brandable. I can't own these colors specifically just because McDonald's have done a lot of good work. Now, mind you, when you're in a different category, for example, Tesla can use red, and they can actually even use, red and yellow if they want, because they are in a different category. They are not competing against McDonald's. So, they're in a different industry, so they can use this color red, even though you might see they chose a little bit of a different type of red, but they can choose it without having to compete against McDonald's. But again, if I'll be in the car industry and I'll try to choose a color that I want to own and I want to compete with Tesla, I might not choose the color red. So part of the research, as I've mentioned before, you want to understand what's already in your customer's head to work against that, right? You want to work with their association. You also want to work with what's branded in their head already. Okay. Now that we've covered the principle, let's talk about what is the process. Let's talk about how to apply these principles in an actual design project. The first step is to get started with a dominant color. What is the focus core color that you are going to work with? Sometimes that's called a dominant color. Sometimes that's called the brand color. It might have different names. Now, sometimes when you start off a project, you don't even have to choose that color because that's given to you. There might be a brand that's already exists, and that's the brand's color, and you just have to make it work in the context of the project that you're designing for. But sometimes you'll have to come up with this dominant color. And so when you have to pick that dominant color, I'll go back to what I've said earlier. You want to familiarize yourself with all of the different association of each one of the colors to see which one has the closest message that you want to convey for that specific brand, depending on its value. Is it premium? Is it funny? Is it, passionate? Depending on what story you want to make, you'll choose a color that correlates with it. Now, that is the first step. The second step, after you've got the dominant color, is to create a palette around it. Which colors you're going to combine with it. As I've mentioned, as a general rule, if you're just starting out, if you're not feeling super comfortable with color, less color is ideal. As you get more and more advanced, you might want to add more colors, but as we'll see, that might not specifically be the right move. So let's cover the different color palette and see which one is good at each scenario. Now, the first type of color is called monochromatic, and mono meaning one. That basically means that we only have one color here. And in this example of the PayPal logo and brand, they've basically just used one color hue, right? So here we see the color wheel, and as you can see, they only chose one hue, which is the blue color, and they're just using different brightness to add more shades. And they've chose a dark one and a bright one. That's a good choice because it's contrasted. And the good thing about this is, there's not much mistakes that can happen here. It's only just one color, and obviously the different shades of the same color looks good together. So that's a great, pretty simple approach. Here's an example of a web design that's using only one color. Of course, when I say one color, and I mean the shades of it, so darker shades and lighter shades, the most extreme darker shade is actually using black, and the most lighter shade of that is actually white. And so a palette of, let's say, red, white, and black is still considered a monochromatic palette that only uses one color. And as I've said, it's hard to go wrong with this type of palette. So that's actually a good thing. The bad thing about it is that you're very limited. you're limited in the versatility of what you can do. And depending on what you need to do, maybe you need to create different calls to action or different hierarchies. And sometimes you will need more tools, more visual tools and colors to do that. But in a lot of cases, you can do just fine with one color, black and white, or the shades of it, and that's going to be a fantastic selection for you. The different type of palette, which is also rather easy to use, is called analogous. And analogous basically means you're picking one color, one dominant color, and then you basically look to the left and right, either in the color wheel or in the U scale that we saw before, and you're saying what colors are immediately next to it, because that would, in essence, create some kind of a gradient, right? All of these colors are one step away from each other. They're very close, and that would create kind of an harmonious look. In this example, we have, let's say, the orange of the pitch as the dominant color, and then we're looking a little bit to the left and right, and we have a little bit of a, a pinkish color, and that works well together. So let me show you another example, this time from UI design. Here, they've chosen the range of colors between blue and teal up until purple, and you can see that when they're put together, it does create a harmonious look. They're all rather close together, and that looks pretty well. So that's also rather easy palette that you can choose. Now the next one, which is also very, very popular and also quite easy to do, is called complementary. And complementary basically means you're just picking contrasting color. So you have a dominant color, and then you pick the one contrasting it, and by contrasting it, I mean on the other side of the color wheel. And I'm giving you an example here of one of the most cliche or often used palettes, which might be blue and orange. The reason that these palettes work together is because they are contrasting. And when there is contrast, it looks pretty good. So here's a real life example of this color, the same color palette of blue and orange within the context of web design. And you can see that it just looks pretty good. Now the last palette that I want to show, and this is let's call it the advanced palette. This is a palette that's called Triadic. It has actually 3 colors within it, and if you want to be technical, that basically means that we have one dominant color, in this case it's the red, and the other colors, the yellow and the blue, have the same distance on the color wheel from the dominant color. So that's how these 3 colors in the Burger King logo looks pretty good together. Now, here's this palette, or a different Triadic palette used again in the context of web design. And you can see the effect of this. This palette looks very, very diverse. A lot of time it gives the feeling of happiness, brightness, a lot of different colors going around. And depending on the story of the brand or the project that you're working on, that might be something that you want or actually need to convey in the design. That being said, this is again the most complex or tricky one to master, because you do have to balance all of these colors together. So I would only use this if really the story and the brand calls for it. Otherwise, if it's not mandatory, if you don't really have to use 3 colors, I'd probably use 2 or even just 1 color in the palette. All right, so how do I know which palette should I use? So I've tried to hint on this together. I think you should ask yourself, like, what do I really need? Do I have a very complex needs of very different types of hierarchies and options and products that I need to identify from one another using colors? Do I have to express happiness or diversity, and that's the reason that I'll have to use a lot of colors? If not, I would go with a very simple palette if you don't have to. And then the last question is, how comfortable are you with using colors? If you're not comfortable yet, it's okay to start with simple palettes before you move on into the more advanced color. Don't think that because you're using a limited color palette, that means your design can't be amazing. It can be amazing with 1 color or 2 colors. You don't have to go crazy. Now, there's actually quite a lot of tools out there, free tools that would help you create all of these different palettes from the dominant color that you've selected. We're going to list all of them in the resources doc to go along with this video. We're not going to cover them on this video, but you want to explore and you want to experiment using these tools. That'll just help you pick out the right palette once you have your dominant color. All right. As I've mentioned earlier, once you have your color, whether it is 1 color, 2 colors, or even 3 colors, you'll usually have some additions, some add-ons to the palette. Those might be what we call swatches, and swatches are just basically darker or brighter versions of these colors. Those might be used either for text, some kind of decoration like lines or stuff like that, or even just visual elements, or they might be used for the text. On top of swatches, almost all of the palettes and the designs that we're going to do are also going to require some kind of a grayscale palette. That's just very, very functional. We'll use, blacks, dark gray, and maybe a light gray and a white in almost all of our design, whether it is for text or, again, some kind of dividers or any other typographic elements. But most likely, we'll also have these kind of add-ons to our main palette. All right, now that we've got our palette, we've got our dominant color, we've got our palette, now it's time to actually apply those colors in your actual design. And the guideline that I want to recommend here, it's not really a rule, even though we call it the rule, is the 60-30-10 rule. It's just a very helpful guideline in terms of how much color you want to use in your design. And the idea here is that if you have 3 colors, that doesn't mean that you're going to use them equally. 1 color is probably going to be the color that you use the most. Let's call it primary color, because that's going to set the tone of the design. Maybe that's the background or something that's really going to give you the vibe of this design. And then the second one, we're going to use 30% to give, it's going to be a secondary color to give actually, create contrast or some visual interest in the design. And then we're only going to have 10% using the third color, which we're going to call the accent, just to draw attention to that part. Maybe that's a call to action, maybe that's a text or something like that. Now, be mindful that a 3-color palette like we're showing here right now can be very, very different depending on who you choose that as 60, as 30, and as 10. And you can, within in a context of a website, for example, you can switch it around in different sections. So one section might have the black as 60, and another one might have this beige color as a 60. So you can play around with it. And here are some examples. In this website, as you can see, kind of the beige color is the 60%. We have this pitch color as the 30%, and we have the text, the black text, as 10%. In this one, we have the blue as 60%. We have the gray as 30%, and we have the white text as 10%. Again, this is not a rule, but you can see that a lot of good designs, it kind of fits into this. So this will just help you assess your designs, whether the colors are balanced out, using this framework to understand if you're doing this, if you're going about this the right way. All right. I want to talk a little bit about gradients because that's something super popular, at times trendy, and it's another tool that we can use. But I want to talk about just use gradients because it's pretty. Why? Is there any actual functional reasons for using gradients? So the answer is yes, you can use them to achieve some kind of goals. Now, the first thing that you can do with a gradient is actually create depth because, and look at this example, because in real life, when we look at things, no color is actually solid, right? We have a light source that comes and hits at places, and so certain areas will be lighter and certain areas are going to be darker. So in this example, as you can see here, they've actually created kind of a swatch. I'm not sure what is the base color, the lighter or the darker orange, but they've created let's assume it's the darker orange. They've created a lighter swatch of this yellow, and they've created a gradient that actually looks like depth. Like it looks like real life. It looks like the sun is shining from the top left corner, and it creates depth into this design. And so this is one function of gradient that allows them to add depth to a website. The other thing that you can do with gradients is just create transitions from different mood, from different areas to one another. And here's an example just with a poster design. Sometimes you just want to switch the color. Sometimes you want to create a contrast. And you can use gradients to switch things up or just blend things into one another. So those are functions that you can do using gradients. All right. I want to jump into a demo and show you how I put everything that we've covered so far in an actual real world scenario. So let's dive into that. All right, so let's say I have this website for a skincare product, and I wanna choose the colors for it, and I don't have a brand color. I'm actually starting from scratch. Now note, I'm going through this demo super fast. Of course, if I would be working on a real project, I'd take probably more time for each one of these steps to explore deeper, but let's run through this fast. The first thing I always do is kind of do a quick research. So if I'm in the skincare, I just went on Google and put down skincare and images and just see what, other people have used before. And you can see that while some colors are dominant, like this color that actually looks like skin, or variations on it in the pinkish side, because a lot of times these products will be oriented towards women, in which the pinkish side might be more appealing. You can actually see that they've actually used almost a lot of other colors as well. And you can see it here. Sometimes they would use a black to create something a little bit more premium, or maybe green to create something a little bit more natural. So each one of these products wants to differentiate itself. So this is almost completely white with a little bit of green. They chose a different color. So you can see you can be quite versatile even within kind of one product area. So let's say that the story that we want to tell with this skincare product is that it's natural. So we want to focus on natural. And, I'm going to go through all of the different colors, and I'm going to make a decision that green is a good color to kind of represent natural. So I'll work with some kind of a green as my dominant primary color. Now, I'm going to use, for this example, Adobe Color to create my palettes, but you can use any of the other tools that we recommend. So let me just work through this. When I load this, immediately we'll come up with analogous kind of palette, and by default, they're trying to create a 5-color palette. For me, it's a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to start with actually monochromatic. Let's explore monochromatic palettes first and then see how we go from there. So as you can see with this little arrow, this is actually the primary color. So I'm going to drag it to the greens area. And I think if I have to choose from a very high saturation, which looks very aggressive, and the little less saturation, it looks more pale, it looks more soft. I think that would probably be a better area, of the greens. So I think I'm going to try and work with maybe this C and D here. Let's try to work with them first. I'm going to actually just copy the colors so that we can take them here and create a palette for ourselves. So by just copying and pasting this color, which is called, we haven't really talked about this, but this is the hex code. This is like how screens represent in the code of specific colors. I'm going to choose this, and this is probably going to be white or black or something like. Let's say I actually want white. All right, I also want white in our palette because I'm going to add a stroke so that we can see it, because I think white is actually very, very good for cleanliness and a natural and minimalism and quality. So it's also a color that helps me tell the right story. So I have a basic monochromatic palette right now to start with, and I'll start thinking about how to actually apply this. So let's think about the 60-30 kind of rule, and let's try to see what would happen, how would things look like if I use this green color for the 60. I mean, make most of this using this color. Let's see how that would work. So I'm going to take this color and I'm going to put it here in the background, and well, it's a little bit of extreme. So let's continue and see. Let's put some of these objects as part of the 30, we'll try to put them in this kind of a shade of green. Maybe actually not all of them. It actually makes sense to maybe leave these. Actually, maybe I'll put this as white as well. And so we only have maybe this product as the core green. Now the thing is that I can't really use white for text here. I'm going to have to use either black or something, just because it lacks contrast. But actually maybe I can use this dark green for the text. Let's see how that looks like. That actually looks not bad at all. And let's try and use it for these ones as well. And now let's think, how do I create, for the button I'm also going to make it green. Let's experiment. I'm still in experimentation mode. Alright, so I would say this is maybe one palette, and not one palette, this is one palette, this is one implementation of this palette. Let me just make a copy. One thing that I will do with almost anything that I would design is, I'd start and I'll make copies to explore different ideas. Let's explore a different idea of using this palette. Let's try to use white as the 60 for this palette. Let's go ahead and pick white color here. And then we'll use this color, the bright green, as our 30. Let's go ahead and give colors to these objects and see how that looks like. And this time I'm going to use black for the text. Actually, I'm not sure that it's contrasted enough. Actually, I think maybe these should be light green as well. They're all light green. There's still a little bit, there's not much contrast going on here. This thing here is taking too much attention. I think maybe that's because our rendering is, very dark. Maybe I'll make it lighter. Yeah, so if I would use a lighter rendering, I can't change the rendering right now, but if I would use a lighter shade of the actual object, that might actually look better. And for this button, let's see what happens if I use this color with this text. No, I think it's actually better the way it was before. It's more contrasted right now, and my attention will go here. So this is another implementation of this palette. Looking at it according to, I actually don't like when the whole background is this green. No, I actually don't like it at all. But you see, that's why it's great to create so many alternatives so that you can keep exploring. Let's try the other way around now when we have the dark color as the background. We have that right now. Let's use here. These are all the bright ones. Let's use this for either this or white. No, it probably makes more sense to use a white color here and this light color for this. Okay, so this is another implementation. I actually think that from all the ones that we've covered so far, this actually looks the best. The only thing that I think right now is actually maybe we need a deeper color. First of all, let's try with a different, we chose this color first, but let's try with this color. Let's try and change the palette just a little bit and see variations on this palette. What would happen if we chose this one here? Now it's kind of like a little bit more toned down. And we might just have this as kind of like with the brighter color. No, I'm going to undo, and I think what I really want to see here is this palette, but with just a darker shade of green. Because I think here it is. I think when we just take something that's way deeper, like this color here, now it actually created a rather nice kind of contrast to this, and that's actually not very bad. Maybe these are, maybe that shade of green is a little bit too bright, so, or let's play around with it here. No, actually maybe it was. I'm going to undo this. Yeah, so I think looking at all three palettes that we've created, as you can see already, each of them has a different tone to it. Personally, I think looking at them right now, I prefer this the best, in which we've changed this color to this color. Let's try a different color combination right now. Let's make a duplicate of this. And let's try a different kind of palette. Let's try, so far we've only tried monochromatic palette. Let's go for a complementary palette and see how that looks like. So we have this, we're going to keep it with this pale green kind of color. And yeah, and we'll try to mix it up with this pink color. So let's keep this color. Let's assume that's the color that we have before. And I'm going to take this pink color and see how that looks like. Okay, so let me just copy these. And basically, instead of the dark one, I wanted to put the pink in here. Okay, so let's explore this palette. And let's see what happens if we have a white background. I want to try the white background one more time. And let's have this using the, let's say this is the product with the green, but let's give it a little bit of purple touches, or surround it with purpleness. And then this here is probably going to be black or something like this. Also, this is going to be something like black. Does this make sense? I don't know. Maybe we'll just use the pink for a call to action. Let's explore this idea. If these are all, actually, let's make them green. Okay, so this is actually a nice combination. I would say that we have 60% of the background in white, we have 30 in the green, and we have slight little touches of accent color using the pink, and that's actually kind of cool. That's not a bad palette. I actually like this. I wonder if instead of white we put some kind of a little shade of, you know, either the pink or the green. If we give it a little, not completely solid white, but almost. I don't know if you can even see this, but actually it looks pretty good right now. So this is a complementary palette, right? They're from the other side of the color wheel, and it actually looks pretty good compared to what we've done so far. Let's also give it a try with an analogous palette where they are all kind of similar. One of them is edging the yellow and another is edging the blue side of things. So let's try that. Let's try duplicating this. And let's see if we can, instead of the pink, let's see what would happen if we use the bluish color, this color, or maybe this color. Let's just experiment. As you can see, it's a lot of just playing around and experimenting. And let's remove this, turn this back into white, and let's say we're still keeping the, let's try the exact same thing but with just blue instead of pink. It's not bad. It's not bad. Maybe we can mix it up. Maybe the blue will be the 60 and just this color is going to be, and we'll make it darker color here. So this is an analogous palette. Let's choose a very, very, very light color. Let's add a very, very light color of the blue inside of this into the background. Very, very, very light touch. I don't know. What if we do a very, very light of the green, just to have a little bit of touch there? It's not bad. It's actually not bad. Okay, so as you can see, rather quickly we've created 5 different alternatives of color palettes all around our basic core green color to explore the message of natural one. If I have to pick one right now, I'd probably go with this one just because these are my favorite color. But all of them are solid in terms of how we use the colors. The colors help to tell the story and create good hierarchies, draw attention to the right place. And basically you keep exploring alternatives and then making a choice. All right, before we sum up this chapter, I want to say a note about color blindness that you should be aware of as designers. About 8 in 100 people have some kind of a color blindness or deficiency, and that actually means that they're going to see your design differently than how you're actually designing it. So you want to be mindful of that, and you want to make sure that you're not communicating something specifically only with color. I'll give you an example. Sometimes you might have maybe 2 different products or an icon that looks the same but just have a different color, and you understand that one of them is green and one of them is red, but somebody with a color deficiency or blindness might not realize it's the difference. So don't just use color. Always put a label to make sure that the message is supplemented, not by just communicating color. And as I've mentioned, we have a resources doc, and we're going to add some accessibility tools that will allow you to check out the palette that you've created and how it looks for colorblind people. That will help you make the right decisions. So to sum up what we've covered in this chapter, when you work through your design, or when you look at the design that you've designed, you want to ask yourself, does this color specifically and this whole color palette help me tell the story and the message that I'm trying to convince that is appropriate for this brand, for this project, for this product? That's question number 1. Question number 2, does the color actually help me to clarify the hierarchies in this design, or does it hinder and confuse the hierarchies in this design? Is it contrast? Is there enough contrast? Is it accessible? Can people really define what is what? They're not being confused by the color. And the last thing is, are you applying this color consistently? Remember, color has a meaning. If somebody sees a green button again and again, and then he sees a blue button, he might think that is something else, and that might be confusing. So you want to make sure that you are consistent with how you are applying color. All right, hope you've got that. We'll see you on the next video.